So the 1986 Mets are the rowdiest team I've ever written about in my life. I wrote a book called The Bad Guys Won about them. And throughout the year, when they would travel, they used a charter company called Ozark Airlines. And Ozark Airlines would supply a DC 9 for the Mets to go everywhere. And the staff and crew of Ozark Airlines hated the 86 Mets because they were rowdy and they damaged the planes and they didn't give a shit about the flight attendants or the crew. There was one famous flight during that season to St. Louis where all the players start throwing dinner rolls at the crew, and a flight attendant has to stand in front of the plane and say, "We will land this plane right now if you don't stop." And they all start chanting, fuck you," and they took the plane. Anyway, it's the National League Championship Series against the Houston Astros. And the Mets win in game six to advance to the World Series in this exhausting, daunting, heartbreaking, heart churning 7-6 win in 16 innings. And the Mets reach the World Series. And because they have such a large group of people traveling back to New York, they're not using an Ozark DC 9, they're using a United Airlines DC 10. It's a bigger plane. And the reason they need a bigger plane actually is because for the playoffs for the first time, Frank Cashen, the Mets GM, has decided the wives can fly with the players. And Frank Cashen was this old school, women should stay out of baseball, no nonsense guy. He hated the idea of women flying with the team. But Davey Johnson, the manager, and the players had really urged him for the playoffs to let women fly. He's like, fine. So the Mets win this crazy ass game. And as soon as they get into the clubhouse after the game in Houston at the Astrodome, there's a keg. And they're all drinking out of the keg. And they're drinking, and there's champagne and all this stuff. But they also have to get dressed and get to the airport because this game ran really late. So they get to the airport. And again, the United staff has never dealt with the Mets. They don't know what they're walking into. And as they board the plane, there are flight attendants handing out little glasses of champagne. And instead of taking like one politely, the Met players are getting on. They're taking three. They're taking two. They're taking five. And they're getting wasted on this plane, even before the plane is taken off. And you also have the wives with them getting wasted on this plane. Well, they get on the plane, and there's beer for everyone. There's a shitloads of beer. So the plane's taking off, and they're just cracking open beers. And everyone's getting really wasted on this plane, on this flight. I interviewed a lot of people about this flight. It's the craziest flight in history. The first thing the Met players start doing is breaking seats. So you have guys just going like, yeah, and they crack down seats, and you literally can hear on the flight the seats going. In the bathrooms, guys are snorting coke. And multiple times, a door swings open, and you see a guy above the sink snorting coke. Nobody gives a shit. The staff, the United staff, makes a huge mistake and hands out pieces of celebratory chocolate cake to the players. And the players do not want to eat chocolate cake, but they love the idea of throwing chocolate cake. So chocolate cake is being thrown all over this plane. Now, the Mets had three guys, two relievers, Jesse Orosco, Doug Sisk, and a corner outfielder, a pinch hitter named Danny Heap. And their nickname was a scum bunch because they sat in the back of the plane. Well, they're in the back of the plane, and dinner is served along with the cake. And they're not just throwing shit everywhere, they're egging people on. So you wouldn't do that. Oh, fuck you. And they're throwing stuff, and people are wrestling on the plane, and they're wrestling in the aisles, and they're shoving cake in each other's faces. And my favorite thing is when I interviewed Ron Darling for this, Ron Darling's wife was on the plane, and he said his vivid memory was all these wives vomiting mid-flight because they weren't used to this combination of hardcore alcohol plus they started handing out little bottles of liquor after the beer ran out. So you basically have a transition from champagne to beer to liquor. And the wives were vomiting. And Ron had this memory of vomit covering patent leather. And all this shit is happening. Fights and food and seats being destroyed. And the plane finally lands in New York. And there are fans there to greet their heroes, the Mets. And as the Mets get off the plane, they're just covered in shit. They're covered in cake. They're covered in vomit. They're covered in alcohol. Whatever, food. And it's like this weird greeting where the fans are like, yeah, let's go Mets. Let's go Mets. And the players are like, eh. Anyway, a couple of days later, United sends the Mets a bill for damages, $7,500, which was a lot of money back then, for damages that would have to be repaired. And it goes to Frank Cashen. And he's livid. He's like, fucking A, He was really a hardcore, old school baseball guy. None of this shit. Let's play hard. So he gives the bill to the manager, Davey Johnson, and he says, "Your players are going to pay for this. They need to pay for it." Davey Johnson grumbles. And next team meeting, he stands before the team, and he goes, "I'm going to read this." He goes, "Guys, do you know how much damage we did on the plane? I mean, does anybody in here have anything to say? Does anybody in here feel guilty?" And Davey Johnson's pacing back and forth, and he has the bill in front of him, the United bill. He goes, "Men, what are we going to do about this? What should we do about this?" And everyone's quiet. And Johnson says, "Well, you know what I fucking think? I think over the next 4 games, you're going to put enough money in these guys' pockets to pay for this. So fuck them." And he takes the bill and he rips it in half, and everyone goes crazy, and the Mets go on to win the 1986 World Series.